All right. About to get started here. I'm really excited for the opportunity to have Yele up on the podcast. It's been a friend. We've chatted in, a couple of different countries, I think, a couple of different events. And now I get the opportunity to actually interview and learn more about him and about the different things that he's been building and working on and dive into the world of also community and the strategies that we evolve quite a bit and also learn a lot from the different founders that come on and tell us a bit about their lens on community and what's worked well for them, right? I've got a really exciting framework to share towards the end of the episode, so that'll be really fun to get into. But without further ado, come on, hop up here on stage, Yele. um, yeah, really looking forward to jamming with you. How are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good, Dan. How's it going? Yeah, it's really good to be here and to reconnect. I feel like it's been at least a few months, to say the least.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, just like the big things you're doing, and like, if you've gone to events or conferences and you're looking for Yellow, you just need to look up a little bit and try and see. You can see his head poking above everybody else, right? Big man doing big things. Excited to get into all these fun elements.
Thank you so much. Maybe there should be like a tall DAO or something in the crypto space.
Yeah, you got to somehow do some sort of proof to verify that you're, over what, over 6'5", or what are you? Are you 6'6", 6'7"?
6'6".
You're 6'6".
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, gotcha. Yeah. But anyways, would love to hear, just like to start off with, just a little short kind of intro on yourself,
Mhm.
a little bit what you're building right now. Give us a little bit of the LA.
Yeah. So where do I begin? I guess I'm a builder, investor, and more recently a creator. Probably what I'm quite excited about at the moment. But I co-creator of OnBoard, um, and OnBoard is essentially building a stablecoin neobank. So we want to abstract all the complexities around like blockchain and stablecoins, but use that to give people in sort of the global majority access to world-class financial services. Currently, we're live primarily in two countries, Nigeria and Indonesia, but users all over the world in about north of 20 plus countries use OnBoard today. Um, but before that, I was uh, sort of a director at Binance Labs, and I helped launch Binance in Africa. Founded a company called Bundle Africa that was incubated within the Binance ecosystem that scaled to about 1.4 million users. And prior to that, I founded one of the first early stage venture firms in Africa called Microtraction. That has about 80 plus portfolio companies across 10 African markets. And a very, very, very long time ago, I was a medical school student at King's College London. So that's kind of some of the things I've been up to. But personally, right now, I've been on this journey pursuing, like, I don't know if you've read Sahil Bloom's book around like the 5 types of wealth. But I've been on that journey of sort of exploring what that means, and then just building more intentionally, building in public, making content about being a sort of a founder trying to build this stablecoin neobank and sort of enjoying that process along the way.
Nice. Really, really cool. I'm excited to, you know, jam more on some of like the company elements, and I love the mission aspect to it, like with more intention behind it and everything. I
Yeah.
guess a part of me, before we like dive into that as well, I'm curious, even, to ask you, like, Yele, like the name is like really, it's fun to even say. I'm curious, where does the name Yele come from? And then tell us a little bit more about, earlier days of Yele before the Web3 world. Like, you
Yeah.
know, where what were you before?
So my full name is Oluyele, and so it's Oluyele, and it means sort of like a good thing, or like a crown has come home. So that's sort of what Oluyele means. And so I'm Yoruba, which is one of the major tribes in Nigeria. I was born in um, Ibadan. So most people who know Nigeria know Lagos. Ibadan is maybe about an hour and a half, 2 hours from Lagos. It's one of the oldest cities in Africa. And yeah, I moved to the UK when I was 15. Got my first sort of computer and phone, and it was sort of this. It's almost like someone gave me a window into the rest of the world, and I got connected to things that I didn't have exposure into. Um, Somehow I ended up in medical school. So I always joke that everything I do today didn't really exist when I was in school. So I kind of just followed, what was the obvious path when I was younger. My parents, my dad was a doctor. I had a lot of uncles and aunts that were doctor. My eldest sister was studying medicine. But I've always been someone that cared about equality, democratizing access, and wanted to always do things that was gonna drive economic development, or at least give people access to opportunities regardless of where they're from. So that's always been like a running theme in my life. And so everything I've done from, when I left medical school all the way through like Nestcoin and OnBoard, there's sort of this interesting thread. And it's always easier to connect the dots looking backwards. But, in the process, it wasn't quite as clear. But yeah.
Nice. And yeah, tell me like what's one thing maybe a bit surprising, like a fun fact outside of crypto, outside of Web3,
Yeah.
that you enjoy, like from a hobby perspective or something,
Yeah.
Just
So I would say probably my biggest hobby right now is two things. Like I love meditating. I really started meditating when I went to Thailand at DevCon last year. So spent some time on an island, and we had this day or this half day where we kind of disconnected from, like our computers and the internet. And I remember thinking like, wow, it's almost as if like the world stopped. And so that's a practice that I continue. And then I also run. So I tried to get into the London Marathon next year, but I didn't win the ballot. But I'm training for a marathon because I wanted to run for my dad. My dad is late, so I wanted to kind of run the marathon and sort of raise money to support people who are suffering from like kidney diseases and things like that, or chronic illnesses. So those are like my two sort of hobbies. I'm the only boy. I have 5 sisters. So that was kind of like interesting growing up, where I want to watch football, and we'll do a vote, and I always lost because obviously I was like outnumbered. um, but what else will I say? We talked about my height. I think. Yeah, I've talked about my height already. So most people are always shocked the first time that they see me, because you can't really tell from like a call, right? So they're always like, "Whoa, I was not expecting."
yeah, totally.
Yeah, and I'm a massive Liverpool fan. Even though right now my team is really messing up, but I love Liverpool. And yeah, that's kind of like, I would say, um, some of my hobbies and interests.
Nice. That's fun. That's interesting. There was a great, I was watching actually Diary of a CEO, Stephen Bartlett, and he had Jurgen Klopp on just the other week.
Yeah. That
And
was amazing. That
it
was
was a
amazing.
good one.
Yeah.
I didn't realize that like Manchester United at one point was kind of,
Right.
really interesting. I had hunting him through. I thought that was kind of news.
Thank God he said no, because I don't know where Liverpool would be if he never became a manager. So I'm thankful that universe never became my reality.
Yeah. No, it's fun. Everyone's really chatting a whole bunch right now on the Uniswap tournament at Dev Connect, which will be pretty fun,
Yes,
eh?
yes, yes,
I'll
yes.
be playing for the Eigencloud team, but I know some of
Nice.
our other mutual friends, like with Bungie,
Yeah.
and
Is it
Joku is
is it
playing.
gonna
I think
be
it'll be fun.
live streamed?
I don't know. That's a good question. It would be smart if it was. That would be
I've seen a
would be fun.
couple. I know there was a time when there was like a football tournament that was live streamed, and the tournament was hosted on Bracket actually. And it was live streamed from Nigeria, and I think even the one of the early Farcaster conferences, there was, of course, I think that was pickleball or paddleball or something. There was some competition that was also like live streamed. So if you guys can get some cameras down there and live stream it, like that would be like fun to watch. Or maybe someone should put up a prediction market to try to predict who's gonna who's gonna win.
Yeah, I think some people are already talking about that in general, which would be pretty funny. But yeah, and I guess kind of locking back in here on the company side of things. So
Mm,
for OnBoard,
mm,
where did like some of the initial inspiration come for that? And like tell me a
mm.
little bit about like the founding kind of
So,
creation of it. I think it's interesting how you use the word co-creator instead of also like in the same element of co-founder, right? But it's more of
yeah,
this aspect to creation instead of founding in a certain
yeah.
sense. Just tell me a bit about the origin story on it.
Yeah, so I think I like the word co-creator instead of founder, just because of the journey and history of like what where we've come from. And so it's definitely been like this continuous process of iteration through the journey, right? So what onboard started off with and where we are today is not the same thing. So when we so to understand onboard, you have to understand Nestcoin. So sometimes people are always like, okay, what is Nestcoin? What is onboard? And so
Mm-hmm.
Nestcoin was founded in 2021. This was kind of like peak of the last cycle. We raised a pretty large pre-seed round, and we were building sort of this holding company that was investing and incubating sort of Web3 apps, right? So we had 5 incubated projects that were ongoing at the same time, and we made a whole bunch of investments, not just in Nigeria but globally. And then 2022 came, and you had sort of the crash of that particular cycle, and we were also impacted by FTX, right? So for about 18 months, about almost $4 million was locked in FTX. So we had to go through a whole round of like downsizing and refocusing the company. And one of the decisions that we made was the thing that we wanted to focus on was what was onboard. And so onboard essentially was a peer-to-peer on and off-ramp protocol. So we built a really interesting protocol that allowed users go from their local currencies into stable coins without having to go through a centralized exchange or middleman. And from a technical point of view, it was like really smart and really innovative. And our big bet was that the world was going to come on chain, right? So everything was going to be like self custody. Everything was going to, instead of having like custodial products, especially because of our history with like FTX, we wanted this world where you didn't have to keep your money with, any third party or anything like that. Now, I would say over the last 2.5 years, like, what we've seen both from the overall market adoption as well as like what our customers are telling us is for mainstream users, pure on-chain apps are still kind of like complicated. And even though the technology has improved, the UX has improved, what has not been fixed is a new problem of fragmentation. So when we started working on onboard, it was sort of Ethereum, Solana, Binance Smart Chain, and Optimism and Arbitrum. I remember when the Ethereum community came to Nigeria, and that was the first time I was really hearing about like Optimism, and I knew about Arbitrum, but I didn't really understand like L2s. So that was, we are still the company at this point. Now, fast forward to today, and the amount of alt L1s and L2s and L3s. And, if you're building at the interface layer, like it's really, really difficult, right? So that fragmentation just made it like a whole mess. And I think what has also happened in the last 12 months is that we're seeing um, sort of um, improved regulatory environments in the US, in Hong Kong, in Nigeria, Kenya, Ghana, Singapore, and Europe, which now means that sort of the TradFi world and the on-chain world or stablecoin world can begin to blend. Um, and so we decided to sort of leave that pure on-chain kind of quite complex for the mainstream everyday person. And we're like, you know what, given that for the first time in, I don't know, since mobile money, or when we began to have fintechs that are replacing traditional banks, we have this new technology stack that can allow us to provide better, cheaper, faster financial services. What does that then look like, right? And that's kind of what OnBoard is. It's essentially a global USD account that can be funded with stablecoins, USD, and local currencies. Comes with a card that you can spend. Right now, it's just a virtual card, but we're about to go launch sort of a card that you can use with like Apple Pay and Google Pay, and then you can send money, in multiple local currencies. So essentially, we're building OnBoard for people whose lives and money do not fit within borders, right? And one of the things I think about now is I'm building for the new 1%. And this is not about the financially wealthy 1%, but it's kind of like this creative class. We're the modern global citizens, if you will. So you earn in one currency, you spend another currency, you travel to another country. How do you manage and move your money? We want to build that. And I think community will play a significant role. And one of the reasons why I'm making more content is that I want to build publicly and hopefully attract that sort of first 1,000 sort of people that would co-create. And that's why that word is key. That would co-create OnBoard with us. So how do we take the Web3 on-chain community ethos, but then apply it to an application that can be used by people that had never even, who are not familiar with crypto at all, right? I think like there's a huge opportunity when you take some of the ideas that are native to the on-chain community, but then you apply it to, a Web2 interface that is powered by on-chain technologies. So that's kind of where we are with our thinking.
Very cool. I jotted down like a note here on something earlier. You were speaking about when it was initially more just directly on chain with no other parties, and like it's a really cool product and component to it. I just finished a book. I'm being on a good flow on Audible right now. I'm just like feeling the Audible books and like getting through my list and crunching through them. And it's called Obviously Awesome, and it's a positioning book. And the biggest nugget for me and takeaway was, if you were to ask your customers what would they compare you to, how would they explain that, right? And when you're introducing a product where it's hard for them to compare you to something, that means you're more on the category lead side, and then you have to do so much work explaining the problem and what you're actually solving, right? Yes. And so as a super good example of this is like when you were straight in the on-chain product perspective, if you were to ask your customer, then what would you compare me to? It'd be like, well, like this is completely new. Like I don't even know how to understand some of this, right? Yep. And then the positioning change here a little bit that you kind of talked through. It's easier now to compare using language that people are like, okay, I know I see Revolut, Neobank, whatever. Like, okay, I can understand like some of this currency stuff a little bit more. It's a little more digestible for like the mass market side of things. And it's just really hearing you explain that, I was like, this feels like these chapters of this book that I was just going through are just like popping up in the back
It
of my
is
brain.
it's so critical, right? Like it's so critical because a lot of us who are building, and don't get me wrong, right? Like I'm very bullish on sort of on-chain apps, like long
Hmm.
term. What I don't have full clarity on is the timing. I don't know when we would have mainstream sort of adoption at scale. However, when you think about it, in the 10 years that we've been in the crypto space for maybe just slightly over, what 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 we've had five new kind of product categories that have achieved insane product market fit and scale. Number one is capital formation. You cannot beat blockchain as a technology when it comes to raising money. Number two is speculation. The blockchain is the most speculative market that you can have. Number three, DeFi. No other technology outperforms the blockchain when it comes to DeFi. Number four, stable coins. And then number five currently is prediction markets.
Hmm.
So in under 10 years, we've had five sort of new product categories, and that is incredible, right? But there's a whole bunch of sort of paths that we've explored that have not really scaled. And one of them genuinely was exploring sort of like an on-chain peer-to-peer currency swap protocol. And unfortunately, that wasn't something that, you know, achieved mainstream success, right? But now most people know the word stable, like neobank, and who know the word stable coins, right? And so when you say you're a stablecoin neobank, like someone can think and say, okay, well, I know stable coins, I know neobanks, and it's like, okay, the next question then becomes, so like why do I need another bank? Like, what are you doing differently? And like, what are you, what's your, like you said, like what's your positioning? And to be honest, we are still figuring out, some of those things. But what I'm focusing now on is I know who I want to serve, right? And when you know who you want to serve, you then focus on one or two key things that they really need. And for us, it was number one was if you're in a global majority market, most of these USD accounts, you have to pay anywhere from 0.5 to 1% to receive USD, right? And then number two, you can't get access to, a card that you can spend globally. So we're like, you know what, let's put those two things together and build like the best sort of global current account that it doesn't matter like where you're from. And community will play a really strong role. I think that's why I was super excited to connect, because I felt like, you were one of the few people in our ecosystem that deeply understood community, and given sort of the ease of what we're building from a communications perspective, I do feel like we can try to build a community, right? So, and when I take into account, let's call it like the network state slash sovereign individual type movement, I do think like there could be interesting overlaps where we're like, okay, we have this product that is a perfect fit for this particular community. So, still early days, but I'm
Yeah.
quite excited to figure that out.
Yeah, the other note I jotted down there earlier related to the community side and the shift that you have here. There's a awesome creator, more so not directly into Web3. His name's Greg Eisenberg.
Right?
He's got a newsletter, he's got some stuff out there, and he has this framework called the ACP funnel. And you're kind of following it in a certain sense, which is build a really big audience, create
Mhm.
content, build a big audience, lots of awareness and eyeballs around your vision in a vertical, in an industry.
Mm.
Then your core kind of most engaged audience members become the community. So it's like audience C community, right?
Mm.
And then you listen to all these pain points that people have in the community in this industry and vertical, and you think about your product, right? And you
Mm.
can then really shape from the feedback in the
Yes.
community
Yes.
exactly something that lands with them, because they're just telling you what to do, right?
That is very spot on. One question: what is the I? You said ACIP. What's the I?
It's just ACP, just three
ACP.
letters.
Okay. So
Yeah.
that is so spot on in that I wrote a memo internally in the company, and I told my team members, I said, I have no vision for OnBoard. So I'm not coming and saying like this is exactly the functionality and we're doing all this. Like, no, I call it ego death. As a founder, I have ego death. However, I have an idea of the types of customers that we want to serve. And I'm like, the reason why I'm creating and spending so much time with like content and being vulnerable and sort of sharing like what I'm calling, and I didn't invent this term, it's a well-known phrase, messy middle. Sharing the messy middle and inviting people to be a part of this journey is pretty much what you just said about like the ACP funnel. Like I didn't even know that was already a thing. But yeah, I'll definitely check that out, because if there's some alpha that can accelerate my process, I definitely want to know.
I'll send you the article and all that. What was the word you said there? Messy
middle. Like beginning and middle, and then just messy
middle. I got you. I thought that was one word. I was like messy middle.
No.
I was like, oh, that's a complicated word. Okay, I got you. Interesting. Cool. Well, I got a question for you that we actually ask everybody who comes on this show. And it's interesting, the variety of answers that we get. I'm excited to hear the way that you think through this. It's around your definition. How would you define the word community?
That's a really great question. So my definition of community is a peer-to-peer network of people that are kind of unified by some common sense of purpose, with rituals that kind of grow the community and propagates its culture, right? That's kind of like my definition. Now, what's funny is that I've never defined that before, so I just came up with that on the spot. But I used all those words like very intentionally. The reason why I said a peer-to-peer or like a peer network is because a community is meant to be flat in an ideal world. It doesn't always start out flat, right? You can try to make it flat, but in the beginning, there's some centralization, but the goal is for it to decentralize. And there needs to be a shared sort of purpose, right? Or goal. If you bring together, and I did this community called On-Chain Dreamers that had some of the best builders and creators in the on-chain space, but we didn't have a centralizing kind of like purpose or like goal. It was kind of like it was almost like a mastermind community in a way, but I didn't ship it as a mastermind, right? So you need that singular sort of purpose or goal that the community is focused on, and then there has to be like an ongoing set of rituals that help that community to achieve that goal. And those rituals and those interactions between the peer network begins to create like a culture, and then you begin to have like a lingo and sort of actually creating an identity that is uniquely that community. So that's my definition of a community.
That's a fantastic answer, man. Like 100% gold stars. Like that. Actually, really, I love the words that you're saying there. You're speaking a lot of my lingo. It's really interesting because I study lots of different things around this in papers and think about how you map these things out. And from a canvas mapping perspective, there's there's three main kind of columns that we often look at around, mapping out your community canvas. And the first one you touched on just at the end a lot there is like the identity, right? It's a really core one. Then is the experiences, the rituals, the components of what you're coming on around, right? And the third one is more of like maybe the structure with how it's actually kind of, held, whether it's IRL or online, different things like this, right? And everything can kind of fall into those three main buckets, right? Like the structure, the experiences, and like the identity, right? And it's really interesting because I ask people all the time at conferences and, different founders, and I learned so much when I just asked them like, hey, what's your community strategy for your product, And a lot of them are like, well, we do an AMA once a week, and they jump right to like, the experience that they do together. Skipping over like, who are we even looking at? Like, what is our what is our actually core, like, who is like the identity? And then the tough part with Web3 and identity for community
Mm.
is that there's very also different types within a singular project. There
Yep.
might be like node runners and stakers and validators, very different type of person compared to a developer and a builder,
Yes.
different to someone maybe in DAO governance. And
Yes.
maybe someone's just a retail investor. And it's like
Yes.
they're all wrapped under that same shared vision of like what the product is doing or what the protocol is achieving.
Mm.
But they have different areas in the way of who they are and how they can kind of be nurtured, right? And so it makes community strategy in Web3 much more,
Complicated.
complicated, complex, but it's fun. It's very like, because my background, mechanical engineering and got my master's. And so I'm very like thinking of things more, equation based, lots of community analytics and measuring the things and the feedback loops and just like thinking through it from that approach. But it's definitely fun.
Yeah.
But I guess curious more so like, for OnBoard itself as like a product with, borderless around that element. One of the questions I had written to ask you a bit about, and I think a lot of other, projects in the Web3 space deal with this as well, is like balancing this element of building something like apps that operate, in the ether, in like the element of decentralized world online, but needing to kind of connect and be compliant in specific different countries, right? Like there's a lot of challenges for that, I'm sure. How do you strategize and approach that balance?
So I think if I'm being honest, like for us, we're kind of leaning into regulation than not. And that's because we sort of see where stable coins are evolving towards, right? So the way I think about it is the on-chain economy is the endless frontier. It's like the final frontier. It's like there's always going to be, you can always like add in more land. It's like you have this small island and endless ocean, and then we're just sand filling and adding in more land. Now at the edge, you have regulation, and regulation is always behind innovation, right? So what is happening now is that, when I think of the ecosystem, I think there's a bit of, I'll call it a bifurcation, but there's kind of like a separation of two islands that are evolving. On one side, you have sort of the pure on-chain, products that are fully decentralized or, no KYC, sort of really pushing the needle on what this thing can do. And I was building in that endless frontier for, I would say, the last 4 to 5 years. Now, the challenge with that is highly speculative. A particular meta can look like it's working and then it just like sinks, because the foundation is not yet fully set. Now, I think like there are parts of the on-chain economy that are being more regulated, and I don't see that as a bad thing. That's because for us to cross the chasm, especially because it's involving money and finance, and you always have bad actors, you need sort of that regulated space. And I think like stable coins is becoming that. So you have regulation in the US and like all these parts of the world that in the past wouldn't even touch stable coins. I think I saw an announcement by Western Union that they're launching their own stable coin, and you have PayPal and you have, all these large corporates looking at technology. And so we are deciding to kind of like lean more in. Our strategy for kind of global scale is going to be primarily through partnerships. So there are a few countries where we would try to get like licenses ourselves, but we want to build a brand that global corporates and institutions and investors would want to partner with, right? So it's almost going to be like a coalition of local opcos that are united under this brand flag, right? So I don't know if you're familiar with, like, let's say the Hilton model. With the Hilton model, you have the brand, but then every country has like its opcos and things like that. So it's going to end up being like the only way we are going to scale globally in a regulated manner is to that model. Otherwise, we trying to acquire licenses ourselves, it's never really going to work. So that's how I see it.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, we'll see how it plays out. But I, having built like in the frontier for like 4 years, I've always been like, the name OnBoard was about bringing, like, creating like mass adoption, and you realize the potential of this technology, right? I really do believe that on-chain technologies are generational and can have tremendous impact on the world. And unfortunately, what has happened is, we've the endless frontier continues to expand, but the gateway through which we onboard the world is getting narrower and narrower and narrower. And I'm like, you know what, I'm gonna go back to the front and fight the battle of expanding that entry point so that we can onboard more people,
Mm-hmm.
to this space that we're building. So that's kind of
And
what I'm thinking.
no, and I do think it is like a bit of this battle also though of like extractive companies as well, who are now just like, oh, if this is the way the whole world's going with on-chain elements and all this stuff, and we can actually save a lot of money with the structure with this, and we can still, get as much as we can from our users, and they're going to go do it in their own way if we don't get on board now
Mm,
ourselves.
mm,
So
mm.
it's like also this battle between kind of corporate big company extraction and owning more of the market also
Yeah.
versus being
It,
more
it's
bringing it back to the people.
un, unfortunately, I think, like, if you look at the history of technology in general, like, this is something that happens, like, lots. You have the big corporates who are not part of a particular industry, and then they wait, and then they try to kind of like come in. Luckily, history does show that, like, the innovators tend to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now there will be a lot of dead bodies and a lot of like people who had the courage to try, right, and build things. Um, you know, but usually it's, if you look at the search engines, for instance, or social networks, and even the internet, you had like old media companies and some of the early, some of the non-internet native companies try to be the winners in this space, and it didn't just like work out. Um, you know, but time will tell. I think, like, you always have this innovation distribution challenge where it's like, can the innovators get distribution long before the
Yeah,
guys in
yeah.
distribution like figure out the innovation? So I don't have a time capsule, so I can't really tell you how this plays out, this
Yeah,
time.
no worries. But we're all part of the journey for it. I'm going to share this framework now, and I know I want to be wary of time. Just go maybe a little bit over here, but this is something that I think could be kind of interesting for you as well. I specifically picked it in mind. So little little flex on our new branding. So the framework here is called the commitment curve. And
Mm,
this is something that the CMX community, actually, I think David Spinks wrote about in 2014, maybe. And
mm,
the whole idea of it is mapping out this elements of commitment from your community to your
mm,
project, to your protocol,
mm,
to your product, right? There's discovering, there's the actual onboard, there's the engaging them, right? And then there's even leading at the very top of the curve. And so
mm,
you can basically map out your own commitment curves in different ways. And I just want to show you a few examples. Like for some projects, it might look like reading a blog post, following on social, subscribing a newsletter, moving up to join community, commenting, maybe attending an event, then starting to post, becoming more regular. Then you might actually be actually hosting an event, and then you become more of a leader, right?
mm,
Another
mm,
example, like again, just looking more at things, kind of being aware, then starting to contribute more, and then leaning more into actually organizing events. And for us, like the way we look at community strategy with projects is a component where I like to simplify more of what we're doing to community structure, like helping people with the structure with the house, the design for that with like Discords
Mm,
and Telegrams. And we're also looking at other community platforms. And
mm,
then the community experiences, which is where the contribution lies, right? And then
mhm,
that's where those contributors are kind of part of that 9%. There's like
mm,
maybe 90% that are more lurking, and then there's 9% that are maybe like contributing, right? And
mm,
then you like bring some of those 9% eventually through the commitment curve, you're up to that 1%. And this is where like we're designing ambassador programs now and leaning in what those look like, setting up the playbooks for them to organize events, organizing that all, right?
mm, mm,
Um, and then you can actually think of this whole commitment curve also in a way of even just like empathy and feelings. Like try to think through what would your community members or customers feel like going through
mm,
this from their feelings. Would they feel curious, excited at the very beginning? Would they feel skeptical, afraid, or confused?
mm,
Onboarding, like you want to like lean to more of these like green feelings here, right? And
mhm,
mapping out like if you were to objectively look at your product flow,
mm,
your community flow, how
mm,
does even the empathy map of this look like, right?
mhm, mhm,
And
mhm,
so this little blank slate up here, I think, is great for people to go through and think about it with emotions, think about it with the actual actions, and try and map out and understand where am I having trouble moving people up this curve? How do
mm,
I basically get people going up this curve? What are
mm,
the strategies? What are the events? How can I measure and see if it's working with community analytics? And then how
mm,
can I find and empower, community-led growth and leaders to help pull people up? People who get up here, how can I have them pull the people, a stage below up in here with them, or even on the early stage up into the contributing stage, right?
mm.
And I think that's where there's a lot of room to move more into. I think of this element. I'm writing an article right now on the retention economy instead of the attention economy, right? How do we
Mm,
think about these elements a bit more,
mm.
right? But would love to hear. I know you have to jump here pretty soon, but
Yeah,
would love to hear your final kind of thoughts on this
yeah.
framework, and then we can
I
wrap.
think I wish you had like more time to jam, but this is like I love when I see something that encapsulates a thought or an idea that you've maybe not fleshed out with that level of like clarity, and then you see it and you're like, oh my god, yes, that's it, right? um but that is amazing. And I think for me, I'm already thinking about how I'm going to like map that out, both at a product level and the community level, and knowing kind of where people are can help you then design sort of the paths on how they sort of grow and layer up, right? So, trying to get somebody who's just onboarding be to be like an ambassador or be like a leader, like you're gonna like it's not gonna work, right? Or being aware of people's feelings and what can happen if a particular stage doesn't land as well for them, is quite powerful. So, we're in the early stages of designing our own kind of community, and I think like the big difference between what I've done in the past and this one is like I've kept it intentionally small. So in the past, I've done massive communities. I've done sort of like hyper curated communities, but with this one, it's like, okay, I wanted a community that was a community but was centered around onboard the product, right? And we've kept it like quite small, and there are 50 odd people in there. um, so now I'm gonna go back, and try to map out like all those stages and just think through all those things. But I thought that was fantastic, and the fact that I can apply that model to products and community, um, because it's not the same. It's definitely not the same thing. Like it's related, but it's slightly different. Um, is and I love what you said about like the retention, because again, if you think about what we said about the definition of community, you want to create a, a peer-to-peer network. And so the the clearer the path that someone can go from like just sort of that discovery stage to potentially leading, the better and more sustained that community will be, because it's no longer now about like the initial sort of fire starters or kickstarters of that whole process. So yeah, I think that's amazing. I want to read and learn more so I can apply it.
Yeah, yeah, man.
Design
Happy to send you some of those details, and we can jam further on it for sure.
for
I
sure.
think what you said there as well, when you look at a smaller community, what's really great about that is creating a lot of the upper end of that spectrum first. It creates the culture and it creates
Yes,
the vibe. And then when new people join, they instantly are like, oh, this is the way I behave. This is the way
yes,
I act. And then that
yes,
starts to compound as well, you know?
yes, yes, yes. You know what's so funny? I mean, like when I think about Bitcoin, and I was looking at the Bitcoin sort of like chart, the truth is that almost everybody who got into Bitcoin in the early days, they didn't get into Bitcoin because it was like this popular thing or they thought they're going to make a whole lot of money. They thought it could happen, but it was so far-fetched that it was actually just, it's like people who are into like, let's say Comic Con or like cosplay was like so niche, and it had these years of bedding and creating the culture and having more decentralized ownership, and Satoshi removing himself from the equation so that you then had like a true community. That's what allowed Bitcoin to be able to sort of create this, to create the industry that we now know as like the on-chain economy. And obviously with today, a lot of communities are weak because we go from like 0 to 1,000 without even thinking about that initial niche community and like trying to get the leaders, before you then add on like other people. So in fact, my big takeaway from this call is I'm not going to rush to scale my 50.
Yeah, and the thing is too is like people try and rush it by paying for it, right?
Yeah, yeah,
And they're
yeah.
like they introduce rewards, extrinsic rewards, and when you start to pay
Mhm,
people, you start to pay ambassadors, they don't
mhm.
become ambassadors, they become contractors. They
Yes,
start to behave like contractors. They
yes,
start to become bounty hunters, you know?
yes.
They're there just for like the element of the pay. They're not there for the passion with the product, right?
Mhm,
So
mhm, mhm.
nurturing that in using other forms of capital and other forms of more intrinsic motivators is how you kind of get there and nurture that growth stage, right? But
Definitely.
and this has been such a fun conversation. I want to give you a little bit of time because I know you got a big call coming up.
Thank you so much.
But really, really enjoyed jamming with you. Here's your socials across the bottom. Everybody definitely go follow Yele along this journey. I'm really stoked for it all and looking forward to seeing each other again in the next conference in the world. Who knows where? I know it'll happen. But yeah, thanks again for your time, Yele. Any last comments that you want to leave with everybody? Or
No, man, I think genuinely I've spoken with different folks in the industry about community, but like every time I speak with you, Dan, like I always just come up with like a lot of knowledge and insight. So I'm like, man, I should make sure like our next conversation is not like 3 months to 6 months away, especially because of the stage that we're in. So looking forward to connecting, and thank you for having me on the show.
perfect. Sounds great, man. All right. We'll catch you guys on the next one.
All right,
Peace.
bye guys. Peace.